Mercedes were supposed to slow down in Canada. The FIA pressure was growing, rival teams demanded engine restrictions, and the entire paddock believed this was finally the weekend Mercedes would lose their advantage. Instead, they destroyed everyone. George Russell wins the sprint. George Russell takes pole. Kimi Antonelli locks out the front row beside him. And suddenly, the same teams begging for FIA intervention are watching a Mercedes 1-2 while Toto Wolff is forced to stop a civil war exploding live on team radio. Because this was not just domination. This was humiliation. McLaren brought upgrades. Ferrari arrived confident. Red Bull expected the new scrutiny around Mercedes engines to finally change the balance of power. It changed nothing. And what happened next may be even worse for the rest of Formula One. The most terrifying part is not that Mercedes are fast. It is why they are still fast. Because buried underneath the drama, the angry radio messages, and the FIA engine controversy, Canada may have exposed something rival teams desperately did not want to discover. Mercedes might not need the engine advantage at all. And if that is true, the entire championship just changed. The entire Formula One paddock arrived in Canada expecting Mercedes to struggle. Not maybe struggle. Actually struggle. Because for weeks, rival teams had been pushing one narrative harder than anything else in the sport. Mercedes only looked unbeatable because of the engine, the power unit, the straight-line speed, the hidden advantage everyone else wanted investigated. And eventually, the FIA stepped in. New monitoring procedures, new measurements, new pressure from the governing body. The message spreading through the paddock was simple. Mercedes would have to adapt, and when they did, the advantage would disappear. That was the expectation. Then Saturday happened. And within a few hours, the entire narrative collapsed. George Russell launched perfectly at the start of the sprint race, immediately covering off Kimi Antonelli into the first corner. It looked aggressive, calculated, almost personal. Antonelli tried to fight back instantly, but Russell positioned the car exactly where he needed to. That moment mattered more than people realized. Because from that point forward, Mercedes controlled the race completely. Not Red Bull. Not Ferrari. Not McLaren. Mercedes. And this is where things started getting uncomfortable for the rest of the grid. Lando Norris was close enough to watch everything unfold directly in front of him. Lap after lap, the two Mercedes cars looked planted, stable, confident. Antonelli tried to stay within attacking distance of Russell, but he never truly looked capable of forcing a clean move. That sounds small, but it isn't. In Formula One, when a driver cannot even attempt an overtake despite similar pace, it usually means the leading car is managing the race comfortably. Mercedes were not surviving. They were controlling. And then came the moment that changed the atmosphere inside the garage completely. Antonelli attacked harder. Russell defended harder. The cars nearly touched. Antonelli ran wide into the gravel at turn 8, losing momentum at the exact moment Norris saw his opportunity. McLaren slipped through. Antonelli dropped to third. And suddenly, what should have been a perfect Mercedes result turned emotional. Because Antonelli exploded on the radio. If this is how we race, it's good to know. That single sentence revealed everything. The frustration. The tension. The feeling that Russell had crossed a line. And here's what made the situation even more dramatic. Toto Wolff immediately shut the conversation down live on air. Kimi, we do not discuss this on the radio. We handle it internally. Think about how serious a situation must be for a team principal to interrupt his own driver publicly during a race. That almost never happens unless emotions are boiling over. And yet, despite all that chaos, Mercedes still finished first and third. That is the part rival teams found terrifying. Even while fighting each other, Mercedes still looked like the strongest team on track. But here's where the story gets deeper. Only a few hours later, qualifying for the Grand Prix began. And instead of collapsing under pressure after the sprint drama, Mercedes somehow became even faster. George Russell delivers another pole position. Antonelli locks out the front row beside him. The gap between them? Just 68 thousandths of a second. That detail matters enormously. Because it showed something very dangerous about the Mercedes package. Consistency. This was not one lucky lap. Not changing weather. Not strategy chaos. Pure pace. And meanwhile, the teams who spent weeks demanding FIA scrutiny were staring at a brutal reality. The restrictions were coming. The pressure was massive. Mercedes knew everyone was watching them. And they still looked untouchable. But the deeper problem for the rest of Formula One was not the result itself. It was how Mercedes achieved it. Because while everybody focused on the engine controversy, Mercedes quietly arrived in Canada with one of the biggest technical upgrade packages of their entire season. And almost nobody outside the garages understood how important that really was. This is where rival teams started panicking. The FIA discussions were centered around engine performance, straight-line speed, power delivery, heat measurements. But Formula One cars are not powered by the engine alone. A Formula One car is like trying to run across ice while carrying a backpack in heavy wind. If the backpack becomes lighter, your shoes grip better, and the wind suddenly pushes less against your body, you become faster everywhere without actually running harder. That is exactly what Mercedes may have done. Their front wing was completely redesigned. The airflow underneath the car changed. The rear diffuser was reshaped. Even the gearbox became lighter and more compact, allowing the team to redistribute weight more efficiently across the car. And here's why that matters. Most fans hear the word upgrade and imagine a tiny adjustment nobody can notice. This was not that. Mercedes modified multiple areas of the car at the same time, all connected to one goal: make the airflow more stable and predictable. Because in modern Formula One, airflow is everything. The car is not only driving on the track. It is surfing through invisible air currents at over 200 miles per hour. If that airflow becomes unstable for even a fraction of a second, the driver loses confidence instantly. But if the airflow stays clean and stable, the car suddenly feels calm, predictable, sharper through corners, and terrifyingly fast over a full lap. That is exactly what Canada looked like. Russell's car looked planted through the braking zones. Antonelli looked aggressive even after his mistakes. The Mercedes never appeared nervous over curbs or direction changes. Meanwhile, other teams were still fighting instability. And this is where the numbers become brutal. Mercedes finished qualifying with around 1/10.5 advantage over McLaren. Ferrari were even further back. In everyday life, 1/10 of a second sounds meaningless. In Formula One, it can feel like an entirely different category of car. Especially at a circuit like Gilles-Villeneuve, where confidence under braking changes everything. But there was another detail hidden inside the technical package that made rival teams even more uncomfortable. The floor. The underside of the car. According to the technical information released around the upgrades, Mercedes reshaped sections of the floorboard and diffuser to improve pressure distribution and generate more aerodynamic load across different operating conditions. That sounds extremely technical. So simplify it like this. Imagine trying to hold an umbrella steady during strong wind. If the wind hits unevenly, the umbrella shakes violently and becomes difficult to control. But if the airflow stays smooth, suddenly the umbrella feels stable in your hands. That stability is what drivers chase constantly. And Mercedes may have finally unlocked it. Which creates a frightening possibility for the rest of the grid. What if the FIA restrictions were aimed at the wrong target? Because Canada suggested something nobody wanted to admit publicly. Mercedes were not dominating only because of engine power. They were dominating because the entire car suddenly worked together perfectly. And if that is true, then the upcoming engine adjustments may barely hurt them at all. That possibility started spreading quietly through the paddock after qualifying. Not panic yet, but concern. Real concern. Because McLaren brought upgrades too. Ferrari arrived expecting to fight near the front. Red Bull believed the FIA pressure would finally compress the field. Instead, Mercedes looked more complete than ever. And hidden underneath all of that? George Russell was sending another message entirely. One aimed directly at his own teammate. George Russell spent most of the season hearing the same conversation over and over again. Kimi Antonelli is the future. Kimi Antonelli is the championship leader. Kimi Antonelli is the next superstar of Mercedes. And quietly, almost unnoticed, Russell kept absorbing the pressure without reacting publicly. But Canada felt different. This did not look like a driver protecting his seat anymore. This looked like a driver taking control of the team again. And the psychological side of Formula One is far more important than most people realize. Because inside elite teams, performance is never judged only by lap time. It is judged by moments. Pressure moments. Conflict moments. Championship moments. And in Canada, Russell won every single one of them. He defended aggressively into turn 1 during the sprint. He handled the pressure from Antonelli behind him. He survived the internal tension. Then he returned hours later and took pole position again. That sequence matters enormously inside Mercedes. Because when engineers, strategists, and management see one driver repeatedly deliver under maximum pressure, trust naturally shifts toward that side of the garage. Not publicly. Quietly. Subtly. But it happens. And here's what made the situation even more uncomfortable for Antonelli. Russell looked calm through all of it. Antonelli looked emotional. After the sprint incident, Antonelli openly questioned Russell's driving over team radio. Then after qualifying, the young Italian admitted his own lap was messy and said he had made mistakes preparing the tires properly before the final run. Russell, meanwhile, delivered a completely different tone. "I never doubted myself. I know what I am capable of. Today I proved it twice." That sentence sounded calm on the surface, but underneath, it carried a warning. Because Formula One drivers understand hidden messages better than anyone. Russell was reminding the paddock that he is still Mercedes' established leader when everything is on the line. And maybe more importantly, he was reminding Antonelli too. Now suddenly, the championship picture becomes psychologically dangerous. Antonelli still leads the standings. But the gap dropped after Canada's sprint result. And momentum in Formula One can change incredibly fast. Think about confidence like walking across a narrow bridge. At first, every step feels easy. Then one mistake happens. Suddenly, every movement feels heavier. That is the danger Mercedes must now manage internally. Because Canada introduced doubt. Not about the car. About the drivers. And Toto Wolff knows exactly how explosive these situations can become. Formula One history is full of teams destroyed by internal wars. Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg nearly tore Mercedes apart even while dominating the sport. Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost became legendary partly because their rivalry became uncontrollable. Now Mercedes risk entering another dangerous chapter. Because Antonelli is young, emotional, incredibly fast, and leading the championship. Russell is experienced, composed, and suddenly driving like a man defending his entire reputation. That combination can become combustible very quickly. Especially when the car is capable of winning every weekend. And this is where the Canadian Grand Prix became bigger than one race. The first corner on Sunday suddenly carried enormous consequences. Not only for the victory. For the entire championship dynamic inside Mercedes. Russell starts first. Antonelli starts second. Exactly the same scenario that already caused chaos earlier in the sprint race. Now imagine the pressure before lights out. Antonelli knows he needs to respond. Russell knows he cannot show weakness. McLaren knows one mistake between the Mercedes drivers could hand them victory instantly. And Toto Wolff understands that one collision could change the entire season. But underneath all that tension sits the biggest problem of all for the rest of Formula One. Even if Mercedes implode internally, they still might have the fastest car anyway. And if Canada revealed anything clearly, it is this. The FIA may have tried to slow Mercedes down at exactly the moment Mercedes figured the car out completely.